You always remember your first time. If there's one thing that's really impressive about Sekiro, it's the way in which it's able to recreate the feeling many thought lost. The feeling of that first time Souls experience. Of not being sure of what to do and feeling hopelessly outmatched. Of having to learn and adapt and overcome the many adversities that stand in your way. The experience of getting good, but also the experience of adventure and personal progression that comes as a result of your journey into a desolate and dangerous world whose rules you're still trying to understand. The differences and similarities between Sekiro and the Souls games feel like they were carefully thought out with this in mind. After 3 Dark Souls games, it was hard to not feel like some of the magic was gone, but I always felt like I was more to blame for this than the games. Dark Souls 3 wasn't bad in any way. It had some of the best locations and boss fights out of all of From Software's titles, as well as almost all of the past features that make these games so enjoyable, but it was also thoroughly familiar. The need to learn and adapt that was once such a defining part of the experience had long been lost after playing and replaying the previous games. In an almost 10-year-old interview, Hidetaki Miyazaki was asked why he created a game focused on difficulty. He responded by saying, "Difficulty was never the goal. What we set out to do was strictly to provide a sense of accomplishment. We understood that difficulty is just one way to offer an intense sense of accomplishment through forming strategies, overcoming obstacles, and discovering new things." The Souls series never stopped being difficult. Boss fights have arguably become progressively harder, but it did stop offering the same sense of accomplishment for experienced players. There stopped being a need to form new strategies when old ones still worked. Obstacles were still overcome, but they were just new versions of those already encountered in the past, and discovering new things became limited to secrets and lore where once everything was new and everything needed to be discovered. To some, the Souls formula that once made these games so unique was becoming slightly stale. And then along comes Sekiro. A game that asks veterans to relearn so much of what they thought they knew, and a game that goes out of its way to feel deliberately punishing at times. The biggest change is to the combat system. If you were to ask someone to try to provide a definition for a Souls-like genre, one of the first characteristics they would have said, alongside difficulty, is a stamina-based combat system. It's been a part of From Software's combat design long before even Demon Souls, and it's something that shows up in every other Souls-like game. So it's telling that this was the main feature FromSoft decided to remove. Combat in Souls games was admittedly often punishing, but it was always very simple at its core. You dodge or block enemy attacks, and then attack them back when you get safe opportunities to do so. The button inputs required for this were always easy to perform, but players had to learn several important skills to really excel. Skills like how to be patient, and how to position themselves. The high damage from enemies punishes players who fail to correctly wait for openings when attacking, and failure to position correctly would not only make it harder to dodge enemy attacks, but also give you less opportunities to get damage in yourself, making awareness of both your own and enemy positionings key. Sekiro introduces the ability to repeatedly parry enemy attacks in order to build posture, which when full gives you a killing blow, and this is often more effective than trying to defeat foes by just depleting their health. It gives combat a different flow and a different feel, but it's the changes to skills required that really make Sekiro's combat feel so different. The 2 previously important skills of patience and careful positioning haven't just been made unimportant. The new combat system is partly designed to punish these very traits. Now being too patient will limit your ability to build posture on the enemy, which will greatly extend some fights. Positioning is also not rewarded in many fights, as enemy movesets feature many big sweeping attacks, and many attacks are simply based on tracking. This means being behind an enemy is often no more safe than being in front, and trying to dodge behind your foe can lead to a quick death, while trying to keep a safe distance rarely provides any actual safety. You can try to approach combat in the same way as the Souls games, but it's rarely very effective. There's another big difference that will take experienced Souls players by surprise, however. In the Souls games, one basic strategy works for almost every fight. avoid enemy attacks, and chip away at their health. Enemy attacks themselves might vary, but the way to avoid them doesn't. You might need to learn the exact timing, but dodging is designed to always be effective. Now in Sekiro, dodging is just one way to avoid damage, alongside blocking, parrying, and jumping. But the real difference isn't just that you have more options, it's that Sekiro forces you to use different ones at different times. The red kanji that flashes on the screen signifies an attack that can't be blocked, but there's 3 different types of attacks that can follow. Sweep attacks can be countered by jumping, thrust attacks can be countered by dodging into them, and grab attacks can be countered by dodging away. Non-grabs can sometimes be parried, but the window for the correct timing is small, and the punishment for failure is pretty high. Enemies will have multiple different unblockable attacks, so when you see the red kanji warn you of incoming danger, it's not enough to react with a button press. You have to react by watching the enemy animation, and then working out the correct response yourself, and even when you realise the right button to press, direction and timing are still important to execute the maneuver correctly. Reacting in time is hard, and even on a second playthrough these moments still catch me out. Reading the correct animation, realising the right response, and performing it in time are demanding in a way like nothing in the Souls games ever were. The Souls games always gave you time to think, but that's now gone. There's an NPC you meet in Sekiro who always finishes conversations by warning you not to hesitate. For a shinobi, hesitation is defeat, and by the end of the game I saw where he was coming from. There are times in Sekiro's combat when this is very true, when there really is no time to hesitate, no time to consciously think what you need to do, you just have to react in the correct way, and doing so is hard. I felt like I had to have certain moves beaten into me through failure until I reached the point where I didn't just consciously understand the boss's attacks, but where I instinctively understood them and could react automatically. And for harder fights, that learning process was brutal. This wasn't the case for the Souls games. You might need to react quickly, but you didn't need to think how to react, and learning a challenging boss fight can feel far more demanding now as a result. But it's not just having to react quicker thanks to multiple defensive options that makes Sekiro's boss fights feel strategically different to the Souls games. Boss fights are more varied now. Some enemies are made to be more vulnerable to posture, while others force you to chip away at their health continuously whether you want to or not. Some fights reward you for dodging away and waiting for openings, but others punish you for trying to rely on dodging as a way to escape danger. Some fights require you to attack continuously, where others require you to be careful not to overcommit when you're on the offense. And then there's the way in which your shinobi tools can be used to give you some surprisingly effective counters to particular enemy moves. The experience of defeating bosses doesn't feel the same as in Souls. There's more to learn, more to experiment with, and a difficulty curve that starts high and never seems to drop off. But for all these changes, it doesn't necessarily mean Sekiro's combat is better. I'm sure people will debate the merits of the new and old systems endlessly, but to me which one is ultimately superior isn't really the point. The point is that they're clearly designed to be different, and that difference has the effect of taking experienced players completely out of their comfort zone. Sekiro is a game that's meant to feel very familiar. Many of the staples of the series are back. You have a connected world with bonfires that serve as checkpoints. You learn where to go yourself, and items are placed around to reward exploration. Enemies drop a currency that's used to upgrade your character and can be lost on death. The aesthetics of the world are different, but the tone and structure aren't, and the story is much more in your face, but it's still often delivered through cryptic dialogue and is set amongst the world falling into ruin. Outside of the combat, the core of this game is very alike to its predecessors. Even small stylistic choices are consistent, like the sound effect on entering new areas or the design of the UI. And series staples like the ever-annoying crystal lizards make a return in the form of treasure carp. This game feels like a FromSoft game through and through, but the one most fundamental part of the experience, combat, has been changed to turn veterans into beginners all over again. And other small key changes also feel like they're meant to take parts of the Souls experience and turn it on its head. Take Dragon Rot. Punishment for death is nothing new, but there's never been something so intimidating as thinking your death might lead to the deaths of others. In the end, this mechanic might seem a lot more scary than it really is, but that doesn't mean it doesn't seem really scary initially until you know more. One of the key safety nets players have always had in the series is that they can be safe in knowing they can die as much as they need, and now this has truly been threatened. What's more, you can't just safely collect your souls anymore. Now the loss of resources is something you need to accept. You also can't grind levels to provide an edge if you get stuck, and outside of one very brave samurai, you'll also have to take all of these bosses on all alone. The few crutches the Souls games left available to players are now gone. And while so much is similar, enough is different that you really can't be sure that this is a world where you understand the rules anymore. Learning the new combat system is a long process, and important information isn't always made obvious. Like the way in which blocking causes your posture to lower faster. This is the opposite of blocking in Souls, where it causes stamina to instead regenerate slower. But there's no tutorial to drill this into the player's head. You're left to figure this important thing out yourself, and for experienced Souls players, it's completely counterintuitive. So much so that I don't think many players realise this until well into their playthroughs. And maybe that was intentional. Maybe Sekiro was designed to be somewhat counterintuitive, to force players out of their comfort zone and to allow them to go through one of the most important parts of the Souls experience all over again. To give players a new world to learn the rules for, and a new combat system to master, where you have to get good all over again. And when you do, you will hopefully have that oh so important of things, a sense of accomplishment. But this approach means Sekiro has a big problem. Something more important than unfair grab hitboxes or repeated mini-bosses. As a game that is similar in so many ways, Sekiro is forced to exist in the shadow of Dark Souls, and there are very few games out there that cast the shadow quite so long. It was clear before Sekiro was even released. All everyone wanted to know was how similar it would be to Dark Souls, and comparisons were already being made endlessly. People were worried the game would be too easy, too casual, too different, too similar. Some fears proved pretty ridiculous, like those around difficulty, but others were spot on, like worrying that the lack of weapon choice would diminish replayability. But it says a lot about Sekiro and the player base that all anyone wanted to know and talk about leading up to its release was how it would compare to Dark Souls, and this didn't stop when people finally got to play the game themselves. Comparisons, rankings, complaints about missed features or changes, Sekiro was immediately seen solely through the lens of what came before. And I'm not blaming anyone for making comparisons. It's completely natural. How can you not? There are so many similarities, so much that is alike, so many of the same feelings that these games evoke. The problem with this is when looking at these games side by side, it's very easy to find shortcomings. Maybe it's the features that are now gone. No build variety, no multiplayer or PvP, no online message system, and no character customization. These things are easy to miss, and nothing's been added to take their place. The stealth system is at best shallow, and the much talked about 2-death system almost has no impact on gameplay and just amounts to an extra healing item. It's also easy to find ways in which systems have changed or been impacted for the worse. Having to collect your souls after death was a great part of the Souls games. It was punishing, but fair. It added a lot of tension to the experience, and made for some really memorable moments when players failed or managed to reclaim their precious souls. Now, you lose 50% of your currencies unless you get Unseen Aid. Unseen Aid is based purely on RNG, and it's just boring by comparison. I never once felt anything upon seeing Unseen Aid appear on the screen, because even when it does happen, it doesn't feel earned or connected to your actions, it just happens. Maybe. Unseen Aid is a far worse system than recovering your dropped souls after death, and there's other examples like this. Even some of the good parts of Sekiro feel like missed potential. Sekiro has some of the most enjoyable areas to explore from any FromSoft game, with great verticality and some well-hidden secrets. But while exploration itself is fun, the rewards from it are now terrible. No armor, no weapons, no rings, no runes, just consumables you'll probably never use, and it's just not the same. Maybe you're instead disappointed about what Sekiro has failed to change. Old problems are still here, like misleading hitboxes, enclosed spaces creating camera problems, and lock-on getting broken during boss jumps. If you were disappointed with how numerous bonfires became in the later Souls games, then Sekiro's sculptures idols do a fine job of continuing and worsening that problem. The shortcuts you do unlock feel incredibly redundant when idols are everywhere and fast travel is still allowed. And with the addition of stealth and the grappling hook, the world feels seriously lacking in danger, making the frequent idols even worse. And finally, maybe the differences combined with the high difficulty just provide too much frustration. Frustration that may not have been there in the previous games. The mantra of hard but fair has always resonated with players, and when comparing Sekiro to previous Souls games, it's easy to view Sekiro as less fair. Difficulty for difficulty's sake is not enough to make an experience enjoyable. It does have to feel fair to avoid being frustrating, but what feels fair isn't so easily defined. In a lot of ways, our basis of fairness comes from past experiences, like our experience with other Souls games. And so things like reacting in time to the red kanji attacks, or seeing a boss with 4 health bars, or the necessity of divine confetti in certain fights, can all easily make the experience feel unfair, and for some players that can be a problem. To exist in the shadow of something as successful and influential as Dark Souls is a hard place to be. Sekiro is similar to Dark Souls in so many ways that comparisons are inevitable, and comparisons can be harsh. In the end, it is like Dark Souls, and for some that might mean they ultimately view Sekiro as like Dark Souls, but worse. But From Software deserves credit for the approach they've decided to take with Sekiro. The changes to the combat system completely force players out of their comfort zone, and the result is Sekiro might be the truest sequel we've had to the early Souls games. It's a game about obstacles and overcoming, adversity and accomplishment, failure and persistence. In many ways, it's a game that is more Souls-like than many others that are described this way. There are understandable reasons why some of the player base might walk away from Sekiro being disappointed, but I hope From Software doesn't change their approach. I hope they continue to experiment, rather than just iterate, and I hope Sekiro won't be the last time From Software forces players to get good all over again.